Day after day, shouted to the world that the Chinese communists were agrarian reformers and that our ally, the Republic of China, represented everything that was evil and wicked. Now, my good friends, if there were no communists in our government, would we have consented to and connived to turn over all of our Chinese friends to the Russians? Now, my good friends, if there had been no communists in our government, would we have rewarded them with all of Manchuria, half of the Kuril Islands, and one half of Korea? Now, how many Americans have died and will die because of this sellout to communist Russia? God only knows. If there were no communists in our government, why did we delay for 18 months, delay our research on the hydrogen bomb, even though our intelligence agencies were reporting day after day that the Russians were feverishly pushing their development of the H-bomb? And may I say to America tonight that our nation may well die. Our nation may well die because of that 18 months deliberate delay. And I ask you, who caused it? Was it loyal Americans or was it traitors in our government?
Hamilton Fish was a prominent Republican politician of the same generation as President Roosevelt. In his book, FDR, The Other Side of the Coin, How We Were Tricked into World War II, Fish undertakes a critical examination of how Roosevelt was determined to involve the United States of America into war and his responsibility for deceiving Congress to make World War II. Let us consider the following excerpt from Fish's book. Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe sought peace through negotiation with America. However, President Roosevelt continually rejected Konoe's request for a meeting between the two leaders. The United States presented Japan with an ultimatum in the form of the Hull Note, in an attempt to goad Japan into war. By doing so, the United States of America would then be able to declare war on Germany. Fish also states the following. There was strong opposition from within America regarding entry into a European war. Accordingly, in order to declare war, the Roosevelt administration needed America to be attacked by another country. Therefore, the government allowed Pearl Harbor to be attacked, thus gaining overwhelming public support for entering into war. In addition to the Hull Note being an ultimatum towards Japan, the very existence of the note was hidden after the start of the war. This led to the American public believing that Japan had launched a surprise attack in the midst of peace negotiations. According to the government's plan, this created passionate support for Roosevelt's call for war. Japan fought courageously to the bitter end. There must never be another war between the United States and Japan. There is nothing revisionary about an attempt to fairly examine the history of a nation and its people. I seek nothing more than to wipe away the one-sided post-war bias and conduct a fair examination of the past, recognizing what is truly right and wrong. This is the proper stance to be taken by an independent nation. Furthermore, such a fair examination of history will enable foreign diplomacy on equal terms.
Harry Dexter White was asked to implement what the Soviets called Operation Snow. Operation Snow was a code name for starting a war between the United States and Japan by deceptive means. Each side had to feel threatened by the other so that they would fight and they would leave the Soviets free in Asia. He writes a memo that threatens Japanese sovereignty and is insulting at the same time and makes it seem as if the United States were about to attack Japan. When the Japanese Emperor Hirohito and his cabinet received the memo, they said that the Americans meant war. They knew they had no chance against America, so they decided to strike first and hope for a negotiated peace. November 26th, the Japanese launched their fleet toward Pearl Harbor, and on December 7th, the attack took place.
December 7th, 1941.
More than 2,000 Americans lost their lives at Pearl Harbor, and thousands of others died in the first few weeks of the war. White was able to start a war between the Japanese and the United States that neither country wanted, that the United States wasn't ready for, and that the Japanese knew they couldn't possibly win. In 1940s, the Finns in Finland picked up a Soviet code book. They sold it to the United States for $15,000. These are called the Venona decrypts, and they were field memos from Soviet spies in the United States to Moscow. They discovered that a man named Jurist was described as providing a large amount of valuable information and that he was a close friend of Morgenthau. By following their itinerary, they found that the man, Jurist, who was traveling with Morgenthau was Harry Dexter White.
It's a Pearl Harbor anniversary story you probably won't see anywhere else. The intriguing possibility that in launching a sneak attack, Japan did to us what we might well have done to them. Tonight you'll hear the details of a secret plan approved at the highest levels of the U.S. government.
With the approach of the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, America has been getting a refresher course on the attack. We're reminded that in the fall of 1941, relations between the U.S. and Japan had steadily deteriorated. But untold is that the United States itself was plotting a secret effort against the Japanese. And now, as Stone Phillips shows us, the old story has a new chapter.
It was Sunday afternoon in New York, and many Americans were cozied up to the radio, listening to an exciting football game.
He's up to the 25, and now he's hit and hit hard about the 27-yard line. Bruiser Kennard made the tackle. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
It was news that stunned the nation.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Now, when most Americans think of Pearl Harbor, they remember how badly the U.S. was blindsided by Japan's naked and unprovoked aggression. How we were literally caught dead in the water, virtual sitting ducks. But what most Americans don't know, and what President Roosevelt never disclosed, is that America had its own secret plan to bomb Japan first. This plan, signed and approved by FDR himself on July 23, 1941, nearly 5 months before Pearl Harbor.
No one knew about the bombing plans.
That was secret. All the supplies were secret. I mean, what we were sending was not a matter of public knowledge.
Our story begins with a romantic chapter out of military lore, well known to the American public. It is the story of the Flying Tigers and their famous shark-toothed P-40s. Also known as the American Volunteer Group, or AVG, they were a small group of daring U.S. flyers, led by this fighter ace named Claire Chennault. They were known as mercenaries, hired by China before Pearl Harbor.
The Japanese were the bad guys, no question about it.
And your mission was to take them on?
Yes, yes.
Their primary objective was to protect China's only lifeline, this winding supply route known as the Burma Road.
Certainly, order of priority was, one, seize control of the air over China. Keep China in the war.
Skip Adair's job was to find the volunteer pilots.
When you were recruiting men for the American Volunteer Group that summer, 1941, what was the strategic goal of the operation?
Well, to kill as many damn Japanese as we could. That's simple.
But in reality, the pilots Adair recruited were not mercenaries at all. While they flew under the Chinese flag, their operation was planned and paid for by the U.S. government.
The U.S. government knew about this, helped develop this plan.
And not only knew about it, but they were 100% behind it. Where do you think the $50 million came from? The United States. It was secret. Nobody was supposed to talk about it. We did a damn good job of keeping it secret.
And the need for secrecy wasn't just for military reasons. Sending not just equipment, but soldiers to China would have been a violation of U.S. neutrality laws.
It was against the U.S. law to fight for under another flag for another country.
But what most Americans will be startled to hear, and what is the subject of this report, is that the United States, long before Pearl Harbor, had secret plans for a second American volunteer group with a much more daring mission.
There was a second group, which would be a bomber group, and the third group would be another fighter group.
So it was all in the works.
Yes,
At least that was what you were being told.
Yes.
We knew that there's going to be a bomber group formed. In fact, Chennault told me that I would probably get the bomber group.
A secret bomber group flying against Japan before Pearl Harbor? Sounds inconceivable. But Claire Chennault, the leader of the Flying Tigers, laid out his offensive strategy for Japan early on. Quote, if the men and equipment were of good quality, such a force could cripple the Japanese war effort. A small number of long-range bombers carrying incendiary bombs could quickly reduce Japan's paper and matchwood cities to heaps of smoking ashes. Now, those were Chennault's words. The question is whether his plan was backed up by the White House. That's the crucial question we wanted someone to answer.
But after half a century, we thought that might be impossible. Well, surprisingly, there is one key figure from FDR's White House who is still around to answer our questions.
His name is Lachlan Curry. In 1941, he was one of the president's closest advisors, Roosevelt's personal envoy to China, and Claire Chennault's biggest supporter in the White House. Today, Curry lives in South America. He is 89 years old, and his voice is frail.
Claire Chennault wanted to bomb Japan, didn't he?
Yes, very much so.
You were an enthusiastic supporter of Chennault's plan.
Oh, yes. And I helped in every way I could, yes.
To push the plan through, to see that it was executed.
The whole project, yes.
This was the secret plan, as presented to President Roosevelt, called JB 355, JB standing for Joint Board, which is the equivalent of today's Joint Chiefs of Staff. Discreetly labeled aircraft requirements of the Chinese government, it lists among the strategical objectives destruction of Japanese factories in order to cripple production of munitions and essential articles for maintenance of economic structure in Japan. The distances from Chinese air bases to target cities in Japan are clearly mapped out. Nagasaki, 730 miles from Chuchao. Osaka, 1,060 miles from Manchao. Tokyo, 1,780 miles from Hangzhou. Was it workable? Were planes available that could do the job? An entry written by renowned General Hap Arnold says, the Lockheed Hudsons have ample range to perform missions against targets in Japan. Advanced bases are available in eastern China. It is 1,300 miles from these advanced bases to industrial Japan. The plan was signed off by the Secretary of War, the Secretary of the Navy, and approved by FDR. The date, July 23, 1941, almost 5 months before Pearl Harbor.
You worked to make sure the bombers were in the pipeline, to see to it that this happened.
That was my job, yes.
And the pilots?
And the pilots, yes.
On July 22nd, 1941, you sent a secret cable to Chennault. I am very happy to be able to report that today, the President directed that 66 bombers be made available to China this year, with 24 to be delivered immediately. Why would you be procuring bombers?
Well, naturally, the purpose of bombers is to bomb. We can't pretend that we didn't know what the bombers were for.
And according to this plan, they were going to be manned by Americans.
Volunteer Americans were paid. They were mercenaries.
But the White House was very much in favor of it. So this had the blessing of the U.S. government.
It had the blessing of it.
Do you think FDR was trying to provoke the Japanese?
I have a firm conviction that he was. These words were from Bullitt's own lips. He said, the president asked me, by the way, Bill, how are you going out to India or China? And he said, well, I'd plan to take Pan Am across the Pacific, Mr. President. And he said, President Roosevelt looked at me and said, Bill, if I were you, I'd go the other way, through the Middle East. I think there's going to be a war out there, and you just might not make it.
In the Huangpu River lie the warships of Britain and America and Japan to protect their nationals in Shanghai. The Japanese ships are the targets for the Chinese bombers, but the American cruiser Augusta was hit by an anti-aircraft shell. Japanese batteries are on the lookout for Chinese planes, and here they come, bombers. British Movietone News records in these first authentic pictures the actual scene at Shanghai as the bombs aimed at the Japanese warships missed their target but burst in the docks. Part of the waterfront held by the Japanese is wrecked. And there's havoc in the Japanese concession. With modern war let loose on Shanghai, the international settlement cannot escape the consequences of war as bombs and shells crash. The Cathay Hotel is hit, Shanghai's biggest hotel, crowded with guests, when a huge aerial torpedo strikes it. Another falls on the pavement outside. Death and destruction follow, and a street panic, as terrified people rush blindly in the vain search for safety. The bombing of the Cathay Hotel shocked the world, and these pictures have been rushed to the screen by ship and plane to portray with all the vivid truth of an eyewitness the senseless horror of war. And here's a big department store, another catastrophe of the first big battle at Shanghai. It was hit by shell fire in a wild duel of big guns, Chinese and Japanese, in Nanking Road, which runs from the famous Shanghai Bund. Casualties here in the busy center of the shopping district were terrible.
Small, grainy, black and white photographs taken 59 years ago. They all depict the brutality of Chinese soldiers on Japanese prisoners and Shanghai residents accused of helping them. This occurred at a time the Japanese were beginning their conquest of China. The pictures belong to this man, John Simon. They were taken by his father, Tom Simon, in 1937, near Shanghai. A Swiss national, he was there on business and invited to witness the executions. These pictures are so disturbing they have been kept secret until now. John's father, just before his death, told his son to make them public. His desire is to let people know what happened in Shanghai. The Chinese soldiers, his father told him, used a variety of torture methods on prisoners, suspending them in these wooden cages by the neck until they died of starvation.
That was something terrible, you know. I mean, you hang somebody on the head for 14 days, 3 weeks, still alive, and everybody who walked in front had to spit on his head.
Some were shot, their bodies stacked for mass burial. Others, mostly Chinese nationals accused of helping the Japanese, were beheaded with a large sword.
For the Chinese, somebody collaborating at that time with the Japanese, that must have been the Japanese. Because he felt his own people, he was working against his own race.
Simon says his father destroyed the negatives before leaving China and smuggled the small pictures out. His mother put the images under her clothing. At the time, she was pregnant with John. Simon knows these photographs will reopen the wounds of war for many Japanese and Chinese whose parents were in Shanghai in 1937. But he feels unlike the atrocities committed by the Germans during World War II, most have forgotten what happened in China.
Whenever photographs like these are made public, a storm of controversy is likely to be generated. Relations between China and Japan have always been difficult when you look at history.
In March 1938, many Jewish refugees escaped persecution from Germany and arrived at Otopolu in Soviet territory bordering Manchuria. Major General Kiichiro Higuchi and the chairman of the Manchurian Railway, Yosuke Matsuoka, made an individual decision to arrange special trains for them. On the ground, Captain Norihiro Yasue and Navy Captain Koreshige Inusuka worked to save 10,000 refugees. Thus, these two people were honored to be inscribed in the prestigious Jewish Golden Book. The Germans fiercely protested this act by Major General Kiichiro Higuchi to save Jewish refugees. Afterwards, upon becoming Prime Minister, Hideki Tojo, General of the Kanto Army, said it was an act of mercy for human beings. In December 1938, 5 ministers of the Konoe government met to discuss Norihiro Yasue's Fugu Plan, how to deal with the Jewish question. This included the Army Minister Seishiro Itagaki, who declared, "We are a nation that respects the coexistence of all. Thus, we do not differentiate between religions." The Japanese government has decided not to discriminate against the Jewish people, but rather tolerate and profit from them.
The whole idea was to give the next generation the information that we now have about how the Soviet Union operated its intelligence service against us when we were ostensibly allies during World War II. And it was an incredible thing. The Soviets had something that no other government at any time in history ever had, and that is a cadre of people in the other country who were loyal to the Soviet Union, and because they were loyal, they were prepared to spy against their own country. That's an amazing concept. Usually you can get a spy here or you get a spy there. Sometimes you get a spy for ideology, sometimes you get them for money. But the Soviets got a large number of people on the basis of ideology. Some of these people paid dues to the Communist Party for the privilege of being spies for the Soviet Union. And they were in the most incredible places. I mean, we all know the names of Alger Hiss in the State Department or Harry Dexter White in the Treasury Department. But there were many more. There was Lachlan Curry in the White House, and amazingly, President Roosevelt's closest friend and associate, Harry Hopkins, in the White House.
If there were no communists in our government, why did we delay for 18 months, delay our research on the hydrogen bomb, even though our intelligence agencies were reporting day after day that the Russians were feverishly pushing their development of the H-bomb? And may I say to America tonight that our nation may well die. Our nation may well die because of that 18 months deliberate delay. And I ask you, who caused it? Was it loyal Americans or was it traitors in our government?